It's worth mentioning here that you could nest if statements within each other to make a more complex decision making process. And what I mean by that is, well, you can have an if statement that has its own test condition and then it gets its code block. But inside of this code block for this if statement, you can have another if statement with its own test condition and code block. And within that one, you can have another if statement. And within that one, you can have another if statement. And you can do this out to infinity if you wanted to, or if your program requires it to make more and more complex decisions. And to sort of get an intuition for this, let's do a simple little program. Let's say that we're going to have this integer number and we're going to have the user say enter a number, and after they follow that prompt and enter some sort of number, we will store that value into the number variable that we just made. And then, well, we'll decide if the number is positive or negative first. And so, well, we can say if number is greater than 0. Well, if number is greater than 0, it must be a positive number. And anything within this code block is going to deal with positive numbers. And then we can say else if number is less than 0. Well, if the number is less than 0, then it must be a negative number. And so anything within this code block is going to deal with negative numbers. And, well, the only scenario that's left is if the number is 0 itself, because, well, 0 is neither positive nor negative. And so we'll just put an else statement down here. And the only other thing that can be in this else statement is if the user has entered 0. Because if the number is greater than 0, we're going to be in this code block. If the number is less than 0, we're going to be in this one. And the only thing left is if it's 0 itself. And so now within each of these code blocks, we need to decide if the number is odd or even. And so how do we do that? And so by the definition of evenness, a number, if it's divisible by 2 and has 0 as a remainder, then it is even, right? So we can say if number modulus 2 equals 0. So we've divided 2 into this number and we've got a remainder of 0. So that must mean that inside of this code block, not only is this number positive because the number is greater than 0, but the number is even as well. And we can put an else statement under here that catches if the number is positive because the number is greater than 0, but the number is odd. Because, well, if the number modulus 2 equals anything other than 0, this number in here must be odd. And so we can sort of cut to the chase here. We're at the end. We can see out, if we've reached this far, that since the number is greater than 0 and we're within this code block, that the number is positive. Right? So this is positive. And since the number is evenly divisible by 2, this one must be even, which leaves the next part to be positive and odd, because we're still in the positive section, but if it's not even, it must be odd. So we'll see out to the screen that here we found a positive and odd number, and then maybe we'll drop down a line. Now let's deal with if the number is less than 0. So I'm just going to copy the odd and even code because it's going to be exactly the same actually. Now the number is less than 0, so we're dealing with a negative number, but still if the number is evenly divisible by 2, it must be even, only instead of being positive here, it's going to be negative and even. And the only other possibility down here, if the number is not evenly divisible by 2, it must be negative and odd. Now, in this else statement, once again, if the number is greater than 0, well, it's positive. If it's less than 0, it's negative. Well, in this else statement, this must be 0 itself. And so we can just see out to the screen that the number is non-negative, right? Because 0 is not considered to be negative. It is also considered to be non-positive. but it is considered to be even. When you divide 0 by 2, you get 0 as a result for the remainder, and that fits the definition of evenness mathematically. And so that's it. We've nested some if statements within if statements. We've even nested if statements within else if statements here, and even managed to use an else statement. And well, let's run this and see how this works. And so let's enter a number, well, 12, and so that's positive and even. That's correct. And so let's enter in another number, say 13 here. Well, that's positive and odd. That is also correct. Let's do, say, -7. Negative and odd is correct. Let's do, say, -6 then. So we'll do -6. That is negative and even. And well, let's just do 0 itself. And so there you go. Non-negative, non-positive, and even. So the code works correctly. So solid example on how you can nest if statements within if statements. You can nest else statements within if statements, even within else if statements. However you need to do it to get the job done. All right. See you in the next one.